a very few words about what we're up to. Then Maurice will introduce our brilliant, distinguished guest. Very exciting times to be running a leading centre-right think tank. I think the leading centre-right think tank. I think our political friends were surprised by what happened last May, as most of us, and so we find ourselves being telephoned for help in coming up with new, brilliant ideas, which we do with the best help of our great friends and research fellows, such as Tony here. Focusing on about 5 main areas, continuing to drive the changes in pension and savings policy, where we're widely recognised to be the driving force behind the recent changes. Energy policy, looking to develop a sustainable and affordable energy policy. We are setting up a China Institute to try and widen practical policy knowledge on China across the political world. We're looking at the long-term future of the National Health Service and how we can encourage a Royal Commission to be set up, which can advise on an apolitical basis how it can meet the long-term challenges which it faces. We're also running our CAPEX project, which is the world's first attempt to build a global digital think tank to make the case for free markets on a daily basis, and where traffic is continuing to grow and widen across the world. So we are busy. We are only able to do this with the help of our supporters. So to those of you who are already supporters, thank you very much indeed. And of course, to those of you who are not, then you must become a member at the very least as you leave the door. The forms will be there. Thank you very much indeed.
Maurice. Thank you, Tim. I do occasionally get asked who actually runs the CPS and how does it work, to which I can give you the answer which all of you are familiar, which is that the CPS is run by 2 people, Tim and Jenny, and they are the masterminds of everything that happens, including this evening, if you would join me. Turning to our guest of honour, we're absolutely thrilled to launch this book for Lord Hennessy, and I will explain exactly why. The clue, I think, comes in the titles of 2 of his previous masterpieces. One is called Hidden Wiring, and the other is called Secret State. So here you have somebody who knows the hidden secrets of the whole of Britain. And I discovered this in the place where you learn everything there is to know. Everything there is to know about British politics is learned, as you're all well aware, in the division lobbies of their Lordship's house. So, for example, when I asked who is the leading authority I could talk to about the British Constitution? Hennessy. Who's the leading expert on the British Civil Service and the Northcote Trevelyan provisions? Hennessy. Who's the leading person who I could speak to about the UK legislative process? Hennessy. So this went on for years. It was always Hennessy, Hennessy, Hennessy. And I finally met this Hennessy. And we came together again recently in an illustrious body, of which Claire is the master. And here you have certainly one of the most compelling groups of people around an enormous table. Peter and I used to sit, this I hope expresses our relationship better than anything. We used to sit, as one does at a great gathering, in different parts of the room, this side, that side, and then as the meetings went on, completely as an act of nature, we gravitated together, so that at these meetings we now sit together. Isn't that true?
Absolutely.
And we mutter together in the way that one does, and we agree about absolutely everything. So it's absolutely, we really do. And it's this book of conversations is a wonderful book, and it has huge pleasure in it. It only has one defect. One defect. Which is, right, if you want to have brilliant conversations with people who understand politics, of course, all these people here are marvellous. But if you want to really have an interesting conversation about politics, what's missing from this book is the conversation with Peter Hennessy. So now we're going to have it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the CPS team for laying on this wonderful treat this evening, and my cherished friend here. He does produce the best recitative at meetings I've ever come across. He was rivalled only by the wonderful Maurice Peston, who we lost the other day, with whom I sat on the Science and Technology Select Committee. And Maurice, in what he thought was sotto voce, but wasn't, Maurice Peston, would do this running commentary on the inadequacies of the witnesses, for which many people would have paid to hear. But this one, sans pareil. Political interviewing. I have a theory about this. I don't normally have theories because I'm a historian. I leave theories to the social scientists in that sort of dreary way that they have doing their research. It's a bit unkind, but you know what I mean. Because I belong to the Max Bygrave School of History, which Maurice does too. I want to tell you a story. Because we're products of North London in the 50s, roughly speaking. You see, and Max Bygraves was the key to our formation, along with one or two other influences that Max we know about. So I want to tell you a story. But my political interviewing theory is this, that we acquire our notions of what a good political interview is and how it should be conducted from the first one that had a big impact on us. And it might be interesting on the way home, if you want to think if there is such an interview that left you with a residue against which you've touched subsequent interviews, a kind of touchstone test. Now, for many people, it could be dated exactly to Sunday the 23rd of February 1958, in a very small studio and television house in the Kingsway. I think it was ATV in those days. And it was Robin Day interviewing Harold Macmillan. Now this was unusual in itself because up to that point, people had gone to number 10 to do such interviews, and they were very rare things. And Uncle Harold was persuaded to travel to Robin Day's studio. Now the two protagonists were brilliantly matched because each was gifted with his own special histrionics, as you remember. Robin had this rasping voice, Uncle Harold had this Edwardian, as he would have pronounced it, drawl. And they both believed in props. Props are terribly important to interviewer and interviewee, certainly in television. Robin's heavy glasses and spotted bow ties, and Uncle Harold's droopy moustache, and terribly, terribly worn suits, which would once have been quite expensive in Savile Row, but had very much seen better days. And both two were actors, as the older Warby will remember, who like to create little scenes around themselves all the time. Not on the level of Rab Butler, who actually would win Oscars for creating little scenes. Well, that was almost nothing, but they were rather terrific. And by the standards of what had gone before, this was a strikingly undeferential conversation, because Day asked Macmillan about the future of somebody Jonathan remembers with great affection, indeed I do, though I never met him, Selwyn Lloyd, who was very much on the ropes in 1958. The press were being very cruel. And the exchange went like this. Macmillan, well, I think Mr. Selwyn Lloyd is a very good Foreign Secretary and has done his work extremely well. If I didn't think so, I would have made a change. But I do not intend to make a change simply as a result of pressure. I don't believe that it's wise. It's not in accordance with my idea of loyalty. Day, is it correct, as reported in one paper, that he would like, in fact, to give up the job of Foreign Secretary? They would never put it like that before. Macmillan, not at all, except in the sense that everyone would like to give up these appalling burdens which they You can just see it, can't you? The weary Titan impression, which he was superb. And here came Robin Day's breathtaking cheek by the standard of the 1950s. Would you like to give up yours? Macmillan, in a sense, yes, because they're very heavy burdens. But of course, nobody can pretend that they aren't. We've gone into this game, we tried to do our best, and it's both in a sense our pleasure and certainly, I hope, our duty. I mean, it's classic stuff, isn't it? Now, sadly, I missed that, because the Hennessy household didn't get a television until 1962, just in time for That Was the Week That Was, and the eruption of the great David Frost onto our screens, which, of course, he did change everything over many years. But the Day Macmillan encounter, most political historians of the post-war years reckon that's the day that the British political interview came of age, and it was the start of the modern era. Now, my shaping moment was October 1960, when staying with friends, because we still didn't have television, and I watched my first John Freeman face-to-face interview. Now, this was dramatic, because you never saw Freeman's face, you had the lights behind him, all the lights were on the victim, as it were. And it was with John Reith, the Director General of the BBC, that great wuthering height, as Churchill called it. And he was 6'6" tall, this great mountain of Calvinistic faith and high moral purpose. And Freeman, in that wonderful officer and gentleman clipped voice, using courtesy as a weapon, which is, I still think, the most potent weapon in any interview, is courtesy. They were very well matched, actually, in all sorts of ways. and Reith emerged as an overwhelming but tragic figure. Asked about ambition, he admitted he possessed it, but not in the conventional sense. This is what he said. And I won't try and do the voice, although it's an amazingly distinctive voice. I've been ambitious in the other sense, minded to do whatever came to one's hands with all one's might. Is that clear? He had this habit of asking the interlocutor if he was getting all this, in order to be fully stretched. Freeman, can you remember how old you were when you first formulated that thought? About 18. Was that when you first realised you had great powers of decision and ability to organise others? A little bit younger than that. Can you remember the occasion vividly or not? Yes, on the top of Ben McDewey in the Cairngorms in Inverness-shire. I'd just been climbing and climbing all day long and wondering whatever I was going to do in the world. And how about this for the coda of the interview? Freeman, have you been happy looking back on your 70 years? Oh, no. Freeman, have you been successful? No. I would like to have been Viceroy of India. I would like to have been Prime Minister, but not for the power or patronage or anything, but for the full stretching. If I was unkind, I'd offer that to Boris, actually. Kind of an anticipatory sense, you know, but I'm not unkind, so I won't. It was tragic and glorious and absolutely riveting stuff, and it had this great impression upon me. And it's left me with that benchmark, the John Freeman benchmark, which I can never aspire to, really, but it really was. They were quite extraordinary. There weren't that many of them. We remember so many of them, but there weren't that many, because editing the New Statesman absorbed all his time a couple of years later. I must confess I'm much more of an observer of interviewing than a practitioner myself. I've done a bit, historical ones for the purposes of books, and a couple of series for Granada's Under Fire, which they revived in the 80s. Robin Day had started it for Granada in the 50s. I was wonderfully well produced, but I really wasn't aggressive enough to do it, because it was, the whole theme was attack dog interviewing. Because, you see, I'm a herbivore, not a carnivore. I'm not entirely a pussycat, but compared to some of my dear friends, one or two are in this room, I am definitely the herbivorous end of the spectrum. So I'm not right for it. I'm much better for the reflection style of interviews, produced by my wonderful Rob Shepherd, than that, and published by my great friends at House. I do cherish one memory of Under Fire, however. It's 1985, and it's Dennis Healy, for whom I've always had this great affection. It's impossible not to like Dennis. Labour was in deep trouble on every conceivable front in 85, including Dennis's areas of expertise, defence, foreign policy, the bomb, all of that. And I was cranking up for quite a tussle, but I knew I'd lost before I even asked the first question, because the makeup lady came on in the studio to dab Dennis at the last minute, because the lights were very hot in those days. And he took her hand and he looked into her eyes and he went, "Pale hands I love beside the Shalimar." He turned to the audience and said, "My old dad used to sing that to my old mum." And I knew he'd got the audience. Nothing I could do. And then, with my morale plummeting, when I did my intro, which was faintly wind up, because that was the style, he knew he was out of camera, and he did this. So by the time I feebly got round to the first question, I was utterly defeated. But back to the reflection series. The idea came from Gwyn Williams, the controller of BBC Radio 4, at the Cheltenham Literary Festival in October 2012. I'd been doing a few interviews that weekend, and she said, "Why didn't you do it for us?" So I was very happy to do that. And the style of these interviews, which was the Cheltenham style really, was interim biography, rather than attack dog in any way. And so it meant politicians who'd done many great things and were still doing great things, but were in a more reflective mode than they might be in their combat phase, when they would be subject to combat interviews, which many current interviewers go in for. I admire them greatly, but I can't imitate them. The trouble with combat interviews, I don't know what you think, we can discuss this in a minute perhaps, is that it produces, it's like fast bowling, it produces defensive strokes. And the real masters of rebutting, getting through these terrible combat interviews, model themselves on the late Trevor Bailey, who was one of my heroes in the 1950s, who had more defensive shots than any other cricketer in the world in the 1950s, and was almost impenetrable. And that's the problem with them. They can be quite a spectacle, but they don't actually yield very much. Probably I'm saying this because I just can't do them, actually, to be honest. But I've learned a good deal from the first 11 that Rob and I have interviewed and recorded so far. For example, let me give you an example. Now, you may not be surprised about this, but I was, from Norman Tebbit telling me how in the late 1970s, when he and Lady Thatcher were getting to know each other, chatting in the evenings while waiting for the 10 o'clock boat, they shared a conclusion about the Attlee governments of 1945 to 51. I think, said Norman, we both felt the same way about some of the things which the 45 government did, which were absolutely right, and which it would have been much more difficult for a Conservative government to do at that time. I said, explain. Membership of NATO, said Norman. It wasn't Churchill that created NATO, it was Attlee. Ernie Bevan in particular, one of the truly great men of British politics, in my judgment. And the British nuclear deterrent, again, how difficult that would have been if it had been a Conservative government trying to take that through against the Labour Party. Now, isn't that interesting? Because counterculturally, you wouldn't think of Norman, who's a great friend to many people in this room, I know, and I hope he's a friend of mine. You would not think Norman would ever admit it to being a good thing that there'd been a Labour government ever. But quite wrong. Interesting, that was. I sometimes ponder the properties of interviewing, especially of the semi-biographical kind. It reminds me of something that the great Alan Bennett once said. Writers, he said, writers burgle other people's lives. And of course there is something terribly intrusive about interviewing, even if when the people you're interviewing are very willing to have it happen. It's like biography. It is inherently intrusive. Now, it cannot be easy, for example, for anybody to answer the last question which I always pose, which is, what kind of trace do you think you will leave on history? And most of them are very, very modest indeed and think very little and get rather wistful about it. And I'm very grateful to all of them, actually, the first 11 that I've interviewed, Shirley Williams, Jack Straw, Norman, Neil Kinnock, John Major, Roy Hattersley, David Steele, Margaret Beckett, David Allen, Nigel Lawson and Claire Short. They're wonderful in all sorts of different ways, and I thought I had a sense of most of them, at least a good deal of a sense of them, but you find you don't really, particularly when you talk about people's formations, the formative years. If they have formative years, if there are particular years that leave an imprint on them, which again becomes touchstones for the rest of their lives. And I'm grateful too to Rob Shepherd, Martin Rosenbaum, my executive editor, and Mohit Bakaya, my commissioning editor at the BBC, and the controller Gwyn, and the wonderful House team from House Publishing here who look after me so well. And old friend, I'm very grateful to you as well. Thank you.